The shuttle doors opened, and Myra stepped onto the surface of Prime for the first time. The air smelled different here. It was thicker, heavier, and carried the scent of metals she could not name. Above her, 3 moons hung in a purple sky, and towers of black glass rose toward the clouds like the fingers of some sleeping giant. She was alone. The Galactic Military Academy stood before her, ancient and proud. Its walls had trained officers from 1,000 worlds for 10,000 years. Every species that mattered had sent their best here, the with their scales and claws, the with their 4 arms and perfect grace, the collectorate with their hive minds and cold logic, and now, for the first time in history, a human. Myra was 23 years old. She stood at 5 feet and 6 inches tall. By human standards, she was average. By galactic standards, she was small, weak, and fragile. Her bones could break. Her skin could tear. She could not see in the dark or breathe underwater or survive in the vacuum of space. She was, by every measure the galaxy used, inferior. But she was here, and that meant something. Earth had joined the Galactic Union only 30 years ago. The Council had debated for decades before allowing humans even that much. They were a young species, the Council said, primitive, dangerous in unpredictable ways. They fought wars among themselves. They damaged their own planet. They had nuclear weapons before they had peace. But eventually the vote passed. Humans were admitted as a provisional member species. They could trade. They could travel. They could, if they proved themselves worthy, eventually earn a full seat at the council table. The Academy was part of that test. Myra walked through the great doors and into a hall filled with beings she had only seen in pictures before. A warrior stood 7 feet tall, his green scales gleaming under the lights. His eyes were yellow with black slits, and when he looked at her, his lips pulled back to show teeth like knives. A noble glided past on legs that bent the wrong way, her 4 arms folded in a gesture of polite dismissal. She did not even glance at Myra. The other cadets stared, some whispered, some laughed. Myra kept walking. She found her quarters in the far wing of the dormitory building, as far from the other cadets as possible. The room was small and bare. The bed was too large, designed for species bigger than her. The controls on the wall were placed too high. Even the gravity felt wrong, just slightly heavier than Earth's, enough to make her muscles ache by the end of each day. She unpacked her single bag and sat on the edge of the bed. From her pocket, she took out a small bracelet woven from old thread. It was brown and faded, clearly handmade, clearly ancient. In its center was a symbol, a circle with 2 curved lines inside, forming a shape like the letter S. Her grandmother had given it to her the day she left Earth. "This has been in our family for longer than anyone can remember," her grandmother had said, pressing it into her palm. "I don't know exactly what it means, something about balance, something about warriors who protect, but I know this. The people who wore this symbol never gave up. Never. You wear it and you carry that with you." Myra tied the bracelet around her wrist. It looked foolish next to the advanced technology all around her. A piece of thread and old cloth on a world of starships and energy shields. She didn't care. The first day of training came quickly. Myra stood in line with 40 other cadets while Instructor, a massive with scars across his snout, walked down the row and inspected each of them. "You are here because your species believes you are the best," growled. "You are here because you have passed every test you could give you. You think you are special. You are wrong. Here you are nothing. Here you will be broken down and built back up into something useful. Some of you will fail. Some of you will quit. Some of you will die." He stopped in front of Myra. "And some of you," he said, looking down at her with cold amusement, "should not be here at all." The cadets nearby laughed. A named laughed loudest. He stood directly behind Myra, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "What is that?" asked, pointing at her wrist. "Is that a bracelet? Did you bring jewelry to a military academy?" More laughter. It's a good luck charm, another cadet said. How cute. Does your species still believe in magic? Maybe she thinks it will protect her, said. Maybe on her little planet they wave sticks and chant words to make their enemies go away. Myra said nothing. She kept her eyes forward and her back straight. Instructor leaned closer. His breath smelled like copper. Cadet, Earth's great hope, tell me, little human, why should I waste my time training a species that will be dead from old age before most of us reach middle life? Because I earned my place here, sir, Myra said quietly. Earned? Laughed. You were given a place here, a political gift, a gesture to make your species feel important. You are not here because you earned anything. You are here because the council felt sorry for you. He straightened and walked on. The inspection continued. That night, Myra found her door painted with words in a language she did not understand. But the translator implant in her ear told her what they meant. Go home, vermin. She cleaned the paint herself. It took 3 hours. The next day, her equipment malfunctioned during a simulation. The day after that, her food was contaminated with something that made her sick for hours. The day after that, someone cut the power to her quarters while she slept. Through it all, the bracelet stayed on her wrist. She touched it sometimes late at night when the weight of the galaxy pressed down on her shoulders. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about Earth. She thought about all the humans who would never get this chance if she failed. And she thought about the words her grandmother had spoken. The people who wore this symbol never gave up. She didn't know what the symbol meant. She didn't know why her family had kept this bracelet for so long. She only knew that she was here, she was alone, and she would not break. Not today. Not ever. 6 weeks passed at the academy, and Myra learned what it meant to be outmatched in every way. The combat simulations were designed for species with claws, scales, and natural armor. Myra had none of these things. When she fought against in the training ring, he threw her across the room like she weighed nothing. When she faced the cadets in speed trials, they moved so fast she could barely see them. When she competed against the collectorate in strategy games, they thought as one mind, sharing information instantly, while she sat alone with only her single brain. She lost again and again and again. But she did not stop. Every morning, Myra woke 2 hours before the other cadets. She ran laps around the training grounds until her legs burned and her lungs screamed for air. Every night, she stayed in the simulation rooms long after everyone else had gone to sleep. She studied the recordings of her defeats. She watched how her opponents moved, how they thought, how they won. And slowly she began to adapt. She could not beat in a fair fight, so she learned to make the fights unfair. She studied the weak points in anatomy, the soft tissue under their arms, the sensitive spots behind their knee joints, the places where their scales did not overlap. She could not match the in speed, so she learned to predict where they would go before they went there, to be waiting in the right place at the right moment. She could not think like the collectorate, so she learned to think in ways they could not predict, to be random, chaotic, impossible to model. It was not enough to win, not yet, but it was enough to survive. The other cadets noticed. At first they were amused, then they were annoyed, then they were angry. Caught her alone in a corridor one evening. You should have quit weeks ago, he said, blocking her path. 2 others stood behind him. Everyone expected you to quit. It would have been the smart thing to do. I'm not very smart, Myra said. No, you're not, stepped closer. You're a joke. Your whole species is a joke. You live for what, 80 years, 100 if you're lucky. I will still be young when you're our dust. What could you possibly have to offer the galaxy? Myra said nothing. That bracelet, said, his eyes dropping to her wrist. I'm tired of looking at it. Give it to me. No. The word hung in the air between them. His eyes narrowed. That wasn't a request. He moved fast, faster than Myra could react. His clawed hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. She felt the scales cutting into her skin. Blood began to drip onto the floor. "Give it to me," he repeated, "or I will break every bone in your arm." For a moment Myra considered it. The pain was terrible. She could feel her bones grinding together under his grip. It would be so easy to give in. It was just a bracelet, just a piece of old thread with a faded symbol on it. It wasn't worth this. But then she thought about her grandmother's hands, wrinkled and gentle, pressing the bracelet into her palm. She thought about all the generations before her who had kept it safe. She thought about the words, "Never gave up." "No," she said again. Roared and threw her against the wall. Her head hit the metal with a crack and stars exploded across her vision. She slid to the ground, blood now flowing freely from her wrist and from a cut on her forehead. The loomed over her, last chance human. Myra looked up at him. Her vision was blurred. Her body was screaming at her to stay down, to stop fighting, to let him have what he wanted. Instead, she stood up. It took everything she had. Her legs shook, her arms trembled, but she stood and she faced him and she did not give him the bracelet. Something flickered in his eyes. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was something else. Confusion, perhaps. He had never met a creature so weak that refused to break. Instructor approaching, one of the other hissed. Leaned close to Myra's face. "This isn't over." Then he was gone, and Myra was alone in the corridor, bleeding and shaking but still standing. She made it back to her quarters before she collapsed. The next morning she was in the training room at the usual time. Her wrist was bandaged. Her forehead was covered with a healing patch, but she was there. A cadet who had mostly ignored her until now approached her during a break. "I saw what happened last night," said quietly. Her forearms were folded in a gesture that might have meant sympathy. "You should report him. What he did was against regulations." "And then what?" Myra asked. "They send me home for being too weak to handle the academy. They use it as proof that humans don't belong here." Was silent. "I didn't come here to prove that humans need protection," Myra said. "I came here to prove that we don't." She returned to her training. Days passed. The sabotage continued. Her equipment still malfunctioned at suspicious times. Her food was still sometimes contaminated. Anonymous messages appeared on her data pad telling her to leave, to go back to her primitive world, to stop embarrassing herself. But something had changed. Other cadets had seen her stand up too. They had seen her come to training the next day, injured but unbroken. They had watched her lose 100 times and get up 101. She wasn't winning, but she wasn't losing either. She was still there, still fighting, still wearing that strange bracelet with the symbol none of them understood. One evening, a cadet from a species Myra did not recognize left a container of food outside her door. Real food, not the contaminated stuff from the cafeteria. There was no note, no explanation, just the food. The next day, another cadet, a quiet who had never spoken to her, showed her a trick to make the training equipment work better for smaller bodies. Again, no explanation, just the help. Small things, tiny gestures, but they meant everything. Myra was still alone, still the outsider, still the human in a galaxy that didn't want her. But for the first time since she arrived, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone after all. She touched the bracelet on her wrist and smiled. Her grandmother had been right. The people who wore this symbol never gave up. And neither would she. The new instructor arrived on a morning when the sky above Prime was the color of old blood. Myra stood in line with the other cadets, waiting for inspection. Rumors had spread through the academy for days. The old combat instructor had been reassigned. His replacement was coming from somewhere deep in the core worlds, from a place where the oldest species lived. When the doors opened, silence fell like a hammer. Myra had heard of them but never seen one in person. They were one of the founding species of the Galactic Union, older than most civilizations, keepers of history and memory. The never forgot anything. Their brains stored every moment of their impossibly long lives in perfect detail. Some said the oldest of them remembered wars that happened before other species learned to make fire. This one looked ancient. His name was, and he moved like something from a nightmare. His body was tall and thin, covered in scales that had faded from their original color to a dull gray. 4 eyes sat in a face that showed no expression. His hands ended in claws that clicked against the floor as he walked, and his presence, his simple presence, made the air feel heavy and cold. Even seemed smaller somehow. Walked down the line slowly, inspecting each cadet with those 4 unblinking eyes. He said nothing. He made no comments about their posture or their equipment or their species. He simply looked, and that was somehow worse. When he reached Myra, he stopped. She felt those eyes on her, studying her like she was an insect under glass. She kept her gaze forward, her back straight, her breathing steady. She had survived. She had survived 6 weeks of sabotage and mockery. She could survive one old instructor. But then's gaze dropped to her wrist. His entire body went still. Myra had seen many things in her time at the academy. She had seen rage and contempt and cruel amusement. She had seen confusion and curiosity and cold indifference. But she had never, not once, seen what she now saw in his eyes. Fear. His hand reached out toward her bracelet. It was trembling. The ancient, powerful instructor of the Galactic Military Academy, a member of the species that had founded civilizations before humanity existed, was trembling. "Where did you get this?" His voice cracked. The sound was wrong, like broken glass scraping against stone. Myra's heart was pounding. "My grandmother, sir. It's been in my family for generations." "Do you know what it means?" The question came out as almost a whisper. "Balance, sir, protection. My grandmother said that warriors wore it, warriors who never—" "Stop!" cut her off. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched something burning. His 4 eyes were wide and something in his face had changed. He looked older suddenly. Older and smaller and very, very afraid. The room was completely silent. Even the cadets who usually made noise were staring. Nobody understood what was happening, but everyone could feel that something was wrong. "Class dismissed," said. One of the senior cadets stepped forward. "Sir, we still have another hour of training scheduled." "DISMISSED." The word echoed off the walls like thunder. Did not shout, but somehow his voice filled every corner of the room. It was the sound of authority that came from somewhere deep and ancient and terrible. The cadets left quickly, casting confused looks back at Myra as they went. His yellow eyes were narrow with suspicion. His 4 arms were folded tight against her body. Even the collectorate members, usually so emotionless, moved faster than normal. Soon only Myra remained. She should have left with the others. Every instinct told her to walk away, to go back to her quarters, to pretend this had never happened. But she couldn't. She had to know. "Sir," she said quietly, "what is this symbol? What aren't you telling me?" Turned to face her. His 4 eyes were like windows into something vast and dark and very old. "You are human," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "From the planet called Earth." "Yes, sir." He stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched out like a held breath. "Your species is young," he said finally. "Barely 30 years in the Union. Most believe you evolved naturally on your world, that you are simply another new species, primitive but harmless, slowly learning to walk among the stars." Myra waited. "Ask me again what that symbol means," said, "and I will fail you from this program immediately. I will send you back to your in disgrace. I will ensure that no human ever sets foot in this academy again." His voice was flat and cold, but underneath it, she could hear something else. Something that sounded almost like desperation. "Sir." "That is not a threat, cadet. It is a warning. There are things in this galaxy that are better left forgotten. There are histories that were erased for good reason. If you are wise, you will take that bracelet off your wrist, throw it into the nearest reactor core, and never speak of it again. He turned and walked toward the door. But I need to know, Myra said. Stopped, he did not turn around. That is what I am afraid of, he said. Your kind always needed to know. It was your greatest strength and your greatest flaw. You could never let anything rest. You could never accept that some doors should stay closed. He paused at the threshold. Stay away from the historical archives, cadet. Stay away from the restricted records. And above all, stay away from me. Then he was gone, and Myra was alone in the empty training room, her bracelet heavy on her wrist and 1,000 questions burning in her mind. That night she could not sleep. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the look on his face, the fear, the recognition. He had seen that symbol before. He knew what it meant. And whatever that meaning was, it had been enough to make one of the oldest beings in the galaxy tremble like a frightened child. Myra touched her bracelet in the darkness. What are you, she thought. What were the people who wore you? The bracelet offered no answers, but somewhere in the back of her mind, Myra thought she heard something. A whisper, a memory, a voice from very far away and very long ago. We are the ones who never stopped, the voice seemed to say, and we are still here. Myra could not let it go. She knew she should, had warned her. The threat was clear, but the look on his face haunted her dreams and the questions would not stop burning in her mind. What was the symbol? Why did an ancient fear it? What history had been erased? She began searching the Academy's archives. At first she found nothing. Earth's records were thin, just basic information about humanity's recent discovery and admission to the Galactic Union. Her species was described as developing, primitive, and potentially promising. Nothing more. She searched for the symbol itself, trying to draw it and match it against known emblems. Nothing. It appeared in no database, no historical record, no cultural archive. It was as if it had never existed. One evening found her in the library, surrounded by data pads and holographic displays. You are still looking, said. It was not a question. The folded her 4 arms and sat down across from Myra. I can't stop. I understand. His voice was soft. I saw his face too. I have studied them my entire life, Myra. They are the keepers of memory. They forget nothing. They fear nothing. Their brains do not work the way ours do. The chemicals that create fear, the pathways that trigger panic, they simply do not exist in physiology. Myra looked up. What are you saying? I am saying that what I saw on his face should be impossible. They cannot feel fear. It is not a choice. It is biology. Leaned forward. But when he looked at your bracelet, I saw fear, true fear. The kind that comes from deep memory, from old trauma, from something that left scars on the soul. So whatever this symbol means, it scared him before his species evolved past fear. Yes, which means it is very, very old. Paused. I want to help you find out what it is. Together, they dug deeper. Had access that Myra did not. She came from a noble family with connections throughout the galaxy. She knew how to ask questions without drawing attention, how to access databases that were not meant for cadets. Days passed, then weeks. They found fragments, pieces, hints, references to wars that had been erased from public records, mentions of species that no longer existed, classifications that read restricted and authorized personnel only. Finally, late one night, cracked through a firewall she was definitely not supposed to breach. I found something, she whispered. They stared at the screen together. The file was old, older than anything Myra had ever seen. Its date stamp used a calendar system that predated the current Galactic Union by. The file was labeled, The Endless War Classified Historical Record. Myra's hands were shaking as she opened it. The first section was a summary. Duration, 847 standard years. Species involved, The hegemony versus Redacted. Outcome, Pyrrhic victory. Opposing species believed extinct. Threat classification, Omega. Do not re-engage under any circumstances. 847 years. A war that had lasted nearly 1,000 years, fought against the most powerful civilization in the galaxy at the time. And they had won, but the cost had been so terrible that they had classified it as an Omega threat. The highest level. The kind of threat that made entire species disappear. Myra scrolled down. There were more fragments. Reports from commanders, their words cold and clinical, but carrying an undercurrent of exhaustion and disbelief. The enemy adapts faster than any species we have encountered. Weapons that worked yesterday are useless today. Strategies that succeeded in the morning fail by evening. They learn. They remember. They do not stop. Another report. We have destroyed their fleets. They build new ones. We have captured their worlds. They take them back. We have killed billions of them. Billions more appear. It is as if death means nothing to them. They do not surrender. They do not negotiate. They fight until they cannot move, and then they try to bite. Another, I have commanded armies for 3,000 years. I have never seen anything like this. They are not stronger than us. They are not smarter than us. They are simply relentless. The concept of giving up does not exist in their psychology. It is not courage. It is something else. Something we do not have a word for. And then at the bottom of the file, an image. A battle standard captured from the enemy, preserved as evidence. A simple design on old cloth. A circle, two curved lines inside forming the shape of an S. The exact symbol on Myra's bracelet. Beneath the image was a single line of text, a translation from the oldest tongue. The enemy called themselves the Unbroken. In our language, their name translates to those who do not stop. Myra could not breathe. His voice came from very far away. Myra, what are humans? The final section of the file loaded. It described the end of the war. They had finally won, but only through complete extermination. They hunted down every last member of the enemy species. They destroyed They erased every record of their existence. They rewrote history so thoroughly that even other ancient species forgot the war had ever happened. And then they watched the empty planet. For they watched. And eventually, primitive apes began to evolve there. Simple creatures, harmless and weak. They allowed them to grow, never suspecting, never imagining that the genetic code of the Unbroken still slept within them. They called the planet Earth. They called the new species human. Myra stared at the screen. Her entire body was cold. Her hands had stopped shaking because she had stopped feeling them entirely. Humanity was not a new species. They were an old one. The oldest and most terrible enemy the galaxy had ever faced, reborn from ashes that had believed were cold forever. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt different, heavier, older, full of memories that did not belong to her but were somehow still hers. "We need to go," said urgently. "If anyone finds out we accessed this file. I need to talk to." "Are you insane, after what we just read?" Myra looked at her friend. "He knows. He's known since the moment he saw my bracelet. He remembers the war. He remembers what humans used to be." She touched the faded symbol on her wrist. "And now so do I." She stood up from the terminal. "Myra, wait." But Myra was already walking. Her legs carried her forward without conscious thought, towards quarters, toward the truth she had been seeking since she first saw fear in ancient eyes. 847 years. Her ancestors had fought for 847 years against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. And they had made that empire afraid forever. His quarters were in the oldest wing of the academy, where the walls were made of stone instead of metal, and the lights flickered with something that looked almost like candlelight. Myra walked through empty corridors, past closed doors, until she reached the one she was looking for. She knocked. For a long moment there was silence. Then the door opened and the ancient stood before her. He looked smaller than he had in the training room, older, more tired than any living thing should be. "You found the records," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." He stepped aside and let her enter. The room was sparse. A bed too large for any species Myra knew, a desk covered in data pads and old books, and on the wall, weapons. Ancient weapons from 1,000 different civilizations displayed like memories. Sat down heavily. His 4 eyes watched her, but the fear was gone now. In its place was something else. Resignation, perhaps, or relief. "Then you know what your ancestors were," he said. "What they did." "I know they fought you, for 847 years. A sound came from his throat. It might have been a laugh. "Fought us. Yes, that is one way to describe it." He was quiet for a moment. "Please sit. What I am about to tell you no living human knows. Perhaps it is time someone did." Myra sat across from him. The bracelet on her wrist seemed to pulse with a heartbeat she could not hear. Began to speak. They were the first great power in this galaxy. Before the Union, before the Council, before any of the species you know today had crawled from their oceans, we ruled. Our empire stretched across 1,000 star systems. We had technology that would still be considered advanced today. We thought we were gods. His voice was flat, empty of pride or regret. Then we found them. In a distant arm of the galaxy, on a small blue world, a species was taking its first steps toward the stars. They were primitive, weak. Their bodies broke easily. Their lives lasted barely a century. By every measure we used, they were nothing. But they had something we did not understand. A fire, a drive, a need to grow and change and become more than they were. We gave them a choice: submit to our rule or be destroyed. Every other species we had met had chosen submission. They chose war. Myra listened in silence. We expected to crush them in months, perhaps a year at most. Instead, the war lasted 8 centuries. Claws tightened on the arms of his chair. We had better ships. They learned to build better ones. We had superior weapons. They stole ours and improved them. We had strategies perfected over. They found counters we had never imagined. We killed billions of them. Billions. We destroyed their fleets, their armies, their cities, their worlds. It meant nothing. Always more came. Always they fought back. They didn't seem to understand that they were supposed to lose. He looked at Myra, and for a moment the ancient fear flickered in his eyes. "I commanded armies in that war. I personally led the assault on I watched their cities burn. I saw their people die by the millions. And do you know what I remember most? Not the battles, not the tactics, not the weapons. I remember a soldier, a single human soldier standing in the ruins of what had been a great building. He had no weapons, his armor was destroyed, half his body was burned, he could barely stand. And when my troops approached, he picked up a rock, a simple stone from the rubble, and he threw it at us. Then he picked up another and threw that too. He kept throwing rocks until he could no longer lift his arms, and then he tried to bite. That was when I understood. Your species does not surrender because surrender does not exist in your minds. It is not a concept you can access. When everything else is gone, you fight with rocks. When your hands are broken, you fight with teeth. When your body fails, your spirit keeps fighting. It is not courage. It is something deeper, something fundamental to what you are. Was silent for a long moment. We won eventually. We had to. We hunted every last human. We burned your until nothing lived. We erased your history from every database. We made your species a ghost, a nightmare, a story to frighten children. And then we watched the ashes. For we watched. And slowly, impossibly, life returned to your dead world. Evolution began again. Simple creatures became complex ones. Apes learned to walk upright, and eventually you reached for the stars again. When your species made first contact 30 years ago, I was the oldest still living who remembered the war. I saw your faces, heard your voices, and I knew. The fire was still there. The drive, the refusal to stop. The council admitted you because they did not know what you were. They saw a young, primitive species. I saw the children of those who nearly destroyed us. Myra looked down at her bracelet. The faded symbol seemed clearer now, sharper, as if it had been waiting for this moment to reveal itself fully. My grandmother gave me this, she said softly. She said the people who wore it never gave up. She was right. That symbol was worn by your warriors, your leaders, your greatest heroes. It meant exactly what she told you, the unbroken, those who never stop, those who cannot be destroyed. How did my family keep it? Through all those, through extinction and rebirth, how did this survive? Shook his head slowly. I do not know. Perhaps some fragment of memory passed down through your genes. Perhaps the symbol called to you across time. Perhaps, despite everything we did, some part of the unbroken survived in ways we could not see. What matters is that you wear it now, and that you came back, and that somewhere deep in your blood you are still what you always were. Myra stood. She felt different, taller somehow, stronger, as if a weight she had not known she carried had been lifted, and in its place was something that had been sleeping for a very long time. What happens now? Looked at her with those four ancient eyes. That is your choice. You can hide what you are. You can take off that bracelet and pretend to be the primitive species the galaxy believes you to be. Or you can remember, and your species can remember, and the galaxy will learn that some things cannot be destroyed, only delayed. Myra walked to the door. She paused at the threshold. We don't remember, she said, echoing his words from weeks ago, but we never forgot. Nodded slowly. That is what terrifies me. The next morning, Myra returned to training. Her wrist was still wrapped in the faded bracelet, the symbol of the unbroken visible for all to see. Moved toward her, his mouth opening to make another mocking comment. But before he could speak, his voice cut through the room. You will treat Cadet with the respect her bloodline deserves. She carries a legacy older than your species' written history. The room fell silent. Looked at Myra, then back at Myra. Something in his yellow eyes had changed. It was not respect, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. When Myra walked to her place in line, the other cadets did not laugh. They stepped aside. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought she heard voices. Thousands of them. Millions. All the humans who had lived and died and been reborn across. All the warriors who had worn the symbol of the unbroken. We are still here, they whispered. We have always been here, and we will never stop. Myra smiled and touched her bracelet. Neither would she.